Well, hello, and welcome to this very special live stream panel discussion about the future of public education. Will K through 12 public education survive the virtual world? And in particular, what might we gain from going virtual? What will we lose from going virtual? What new tools and trainings will teachers need to provide for optimal education? And fundamentally, what can we do to help students learn, to help teachers teach, and to help parents raise their kids while also juggling their own remote work and their household responsibilities? So, as we've seen, higher education is already giving way. Many colleges and universities are announcing that they will not be returning in person this fall and will remain virtual for the rest of 2020. So it's one thing to ask young adults, right, 18 to 22-year-olds, to take a greater level of responsibility for their own education. But it's quite another thing to ask a 6-year-old to do the same. And that is what we're going to be exploring today. So I'm about to introduce you to today's panelists. But before I do, let me first say hello. Welcome. My name is Brian Miller. I am an author, speaker, coach, and consultant on human connection. I work with organizations and educators all over the world to help them build environments where everyone feels heard, understood, and valued. And I also host the podcast Beyond Networking, where we help young adults build a sustainable career in an increasingly unpredictable world. But you're not here for me. I'm not even here for me. So let's meet today's panelists and get into this discussion. Welcome, everybody. Kelsey, Brian, Adam, how are you?
Yeah, doing great. Thanks for having us on.
Doing well.
Fantastic. I love that. I as soon as I asked that question, I realized everyone was going to try to answer at once and no audio was going to get through. That was great. We're learning right now how this all works. So for those watching, I think it would be best if we went around the room and actually have everybody introduce themselves. So let's start with Adam, and each person, here's what I want you to do. Obviously, you can give us your name and give us your background, and more to the point, the background that actually qualifies you to talk on this particular topic. Because I think one of the biggest problems we're seeing in the world right now is there's a lot of people talking in the media all the time who are qualified to talk on some things, but here they are talking about something they're not actually qualified to talk about. And everyone's entitled to their own opinion, of course, but there's a reason each of the three of you is here today. You each have your own little section of expertise. And so Adam, why don't you give us that for yourself?
Sure. Adam Kreutinger. I'm an art teacher in elementary school. My building is K-5, and I've been teaching art at the elementary school level for about 8 years now. And one thing that I think is interesting about what I can kind of bring to this too is I've been doing a lot of virtual teaching for a while through other avenues, through my, I'm also a puppeteer as a hobby and on the side. And I've kind of turned that into a little mini side business where I teach people how to build and use puppets. And I've been doing that virtually for years. And now I'm taking those same techniques that I've been doing forever and applying that to my classroom right now. And it's been an easy, even though not a willing transition that I wanted to make leaving the classroom, but it hasn't been as hard on me as it may have been for some other teachers.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, Adam. Kelsey, why don't you tell us who you are and what you do and how you can help us in this conversation?
Hey, everyone. I'm Kelsey Hammer-Parks, and I am a videographer. And for the last 12 years, I've really specialized in K-12 education. And how I can help us is that I've seen how education has progressed over those last 12 years. And I've worked from kindergartner all the way up to seniors and with administration and with students. So I've seen kind of all these moving pieces, and I realized kind of where the hangups might be, and especially when it comes to moving into the virtual world and why some people are kind of stuck in their ways. So I have that side of me, and the other side of me is working to make online tutorials, is working with schools to help their branding through video. And schools are coming around to realize this is really important and we can't just throw stuff out there. We need to have a consistent message. So I have a lot of different areas of interest about this conversation, but I'm really excited to be here because I think that it's going to be fun.
Fantastic. We are thrilled to have you here. I think you're going to provide a really, really unique perspective in this particular conversation. And Brian, the other Brian, of all the people in the world we could have chosen, we chose two of us with the same name. So, other Brian, introduce yourself.
We did. Brian, Western New York. And I've been teaching since 2005. I have classroom experience in grade 6. And I have since 2008, I've been working as an instructional coach. Basically, I work with every teacher you can imagine in helping them reach their goals for kids. I have spanned the K-8 spectrum and have recently taken on some adjunct work at a local university here. I'm also supporting their residency program, which is basically instead of a typical teacher placement, 6 weeks or so in a setting, we're now putting teachers or becoming new teachers in classroom settings with a mentor teacher for an entire year at the university level. And they serve this sort of apprenticeship and this residency, and then they are basically in the hiring pool for Buffalo Public Schools. And so we're getting new novice teachers in that area there. And then also, I think another important part of this is I am married to an educator, a 3rd grade educator. And I get that. I have 2 kids of my own, 3rd and 5th. And I coach local youth sports. So I'm around the conversation of kids learning, and the community involvement as well. So I think that will add some perspective too. So thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks so much for being here, everybody. I'm excited to get into this, and I think we have so much ground to cover. Let's just dive right in. And I think the best thing we can do is set the context for this conversation. Adam, maybe you can give us the context, because you and I ended up deciding we wanted to have this kind of panel discussion here as a result of a very specific random video call that you made to me last week when I was totally unprepared for a video call. Don't do that to people. Don't video call people without warning. But why don't you and
right, that's the world we live in now. That's the new normal.
And as Adam gives this context, you all can go in the chat and tell us, what do you think? Should public schools return to in-person this fall? Why don't you give us the answer to that? Meanwhile, Adam, take it away.
So I know me and Brian, we talk often, and about a month ago or so, we were talking about education, and we talked about how easily that transition would be for the upper grades, like college and maybe even high school, like we were talking about before. But I was saying I didn't think that could work as well in the elementary setting. But just the other day, we were doing a phone conference, and I had my niece over who was in 1st grade. And while we were talking, in the background, I noticed she was doing her she was in a virtual classroom as a 1st grader with her teacher, and the whole class was in there. And it wasn't. I wasn't shocked to see that it was happening, because what else are we going to do now? But I was shocked to see how well it was actually working. And one thing I want to say up front, though, is, of course, I don't think it can ever be a full replacement than with an in-person classroom setting. But in this situation, I was surprised to see how well it was actually working. All the kids, 1st graders, muted themselves, and they would raise their hand, and then they would unmute themselves and answer the question. A lot of visual cues, thumbs up on the screen if you understand. So they didn't even need to do that. And even building some certain lessons. Again, there's limitations in this, but there were some certain lessons they were doing that actually probably worked better in that setting that you couldn't even do in the classroom. So again, I was just shocked to see that it was working in 1st grade. So, and that's why I was like, Brian, we got to talk about this with more people and see what they think and talk about it.
Seriously, when I saw that, when you showed me on the video, when I was staring at this video chat and you were showing me, and you were just, you were so excited. You were like, look, like all this stuff you and I have been talking about in theory very publicly for the last 2 months was just right there working in real time. And it wasn't like some young 22-year-old teacher who came up with this technology either. It was a slightly, older, more veteran teacher. Yeah, it was amazing.
It was remarkable. The only thing, and I did tweet this out too, that Google Hangouts needs to do is move the mute button further away from the end call button. That went to unmute and then they hung up. And it only happened like 2 or 3 times. But then again, we're new to this too. If they just move that button to the other side, it'll get rid of those accidents. But other than that, it was remarkable to watch. One of the things I'll point out that they were doing, again, this is at that level. So they were doing some simple counting things. So it was like, okay, so everyone freeze now. What I want you to do is go and find 4 shoes. Ready, set, go. And they all the screens all scattered. The kids were gone. And they came back up and they held up their shoes. And the next one, okay, next we're going to do number 5. Next, I want you to get 5 spoons. But you have to make sure you put those shoes away first. And then they scattered again. All the shoes went away and they brought back 5 spoons. And again, that's not something you could necessarily do in a regular classroom, but it was just like, it was such a perfect use of that medium, I thought.
I think that's awesome. And I think that makes me think where I want to start here is I want to start the first question and maybe we'll start with the other Brian on this one because we kind of heard a little bit from Adam on this just now, which is what is the biggest upside, the biggest potential upside of virtual education? We're hearing a lot of doom and gloom. We all know the obvious downsides. We're here. That's all anybody's talking about. But Brian, what do you think the biggest potential upside is from virtual?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest potential upside that I'm noticing most is that there's a time and an evaluation for us to sort of navigate the choices in the current circumstances we already have. So we have some things in place, things like homework or things like valedictorian, right? All of these things can now be evaluated and at least be open for some sort of discussion around what are the essentials that we need to navigate and put our sort of resources behind in order to get the biggest bang for our buck when it comes to remote learning and teaching now, but then also what happens when we resume. Are there some things that we can tease out that perhaps don't serve us or move us forward, whether it's certain content applications, or I've heard a lot of people say recently in my circles on my PLN, we are certainly down on paper now, right? Like we're not using paper or we're not getting into worksheets. Now, I'm sure there's a digital substitute for that, but you certainly don't see the amount of paper being used by kids in a sort of static way. So I think there's a chance for really reevaluating what does it mean to have inquiry, or what does it mean to navigate the waters of engagement when it comes to having kids be a little bit more clear about their own learning. So I think really navigating the choices and what's going to be essential going forward. I think that's the upside here. And again, that comes with large amounts of discourse when it comes to this. And I think it really has to play into all the stakeholders that are involved as well.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. So Kelsey, you're nodding right there. What do you think about that, and what do you think is the kind of the big potential upside here?
Yes, I made some notes because there are just so many upsides that I'm looking at. The one that comes to my mind first is really the possibility for using this as a supplemental instruction in the future. For years, I'll say years, like 5 or 6 years, I've been preaching to teachers, especially those doing hands-on stuff. Hey, you need to make videos so that kids can access this before class, so they come in, they know what's going on, or after class to, oh, I forgot what we were doing, I need to go look at this. And I think not even just hands-on activities, but anything that has to do with learning what you can show people. I think we are now seeing, hey, we can create these videos in a time of crisis and we can use those down the road. So I have some other things listed, but for me, I just see teachers developing some skills on how to make videos that really can help them down the road. And once you make a video, as long as it doesn't become outdated, you can use it over and over again. You don't have to keep saying the same thing. So I see a lot of upside there.
Yeah, Adam, go for it.
I was going to add on one thing too, because you made a really good point. It's kind of necessary in these times of crisis like this. But also, one thing I was mentioning this to Brian Sepe the other day is even for non-crisis things in the future. Like I'm realizing now that in Buffalo, we probably had our last snow day as as a district. In the future, those will be virtual teaching days. And so it's just going to be a tool that we use as educators rather than just in a time of a time like this.
And Kelsey, you bring up a really good point with that too, with the video connection, having it live longer than just perhaps the 45 minutes that I think we try to figure things out. The kids come in at 9 o'clock and automatically I'm starting something by 10, but that thing is sort of a wallflower now. It's faded a bit, right? It's behind us. And there's a way to capture that I think is really important to keep the learning going and that momentum building, whether that's a connection that comes in at home or it's something that lives a little bit longer for kids throughout the day. I think that you're onto something there that I think that is the upside. That's a big upside.
And a thing I'll keep bringing up, which I know we've all brought up in the past, is that we can't think of video and virtual instruction as the same thing as in person. We have to think of it differently. So I don't suggest that, oh, you should set up a camera next time you have in-person class and just record what's going on and upload it. That's what a lot of professors are doing right now. Well, I'm uploading my lecture. Well, you have all these tools and also video. People have no attention spans on the internet. Like they're already looking at other things. So you have to think of it differently. And I keep preaching that to educators. They're just not thinking differently. And I understand it's a kind of a crisis time, but now's the time. You have low pressure, like think differently, do something different.
I'd compare that to trying to like do virtual cafeteria lunch. Yeah. It's like some things just don't work that way. So you have to do it in a new way.
No, I think that is maybe the key point that has been missed so far in all of these conversations. And it was interesting the other day when in New York they announced, we have to reimagine. We're working with Bill Gates to reimagine education. And I saw I don't know about you guys, but all the teachers that I'm connected with, hundreds of teachers, just freaked out on social media. And I was perplexed by the freak. I thought when they said, "Oh, we're going to reimagine education for the new world," and I was like, "Yes, it's like finally, right? It's been 150 years since we've done that. I mean, like literally." But then I saw teachers freaking out. People who are on the ground, and I'm again like talking about where our expertise is. I'm not a teacher in a classroom, so I started asking my friends who are teachers, why are you so concerned about this? And I didn't get a whole lot of really articulated answers. What I got was a whole lot of emotion. I got a response of, but like, what's it going to look like? And I think that concern over what would some new thing be and am I prepared to teach in that environment, I think is the real concern right now. But what we have to remember is, as you were all just saying, it doesn't make any sense to take what we used to do and just shove it into a virtual medium. We have to take a really serious look at what virtual gives us, what is available in terms of the tools and the technologies and the ability to connect all over the world, and not just do it in real time, but do it, Kelsey, to what you were talking about, that stays around. Like, Adam and I both run YouTube channels, have for years. Some of my videos from 3, 4, 5 years ago are still today getting 5,000, 10,000 views a month, because that was one piece of instruction that took me a couple hours to make once 4 years ago. And there's people all over the world years later getting value from that piece of instruction. But that requires us to completely reimagine. So before we really dive into the heavy stuff here, what do you each believe is the biggest challenge to virtual education? When we talk, when you feel that those teachers that just pull back right away with that emotional response, like, what do you think it is? Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I think a lot of them are just reacting to it with the wrong perspective. I think they're looking at this situation like a broken arm. Like, we just got to nurture it for a little while, let it heal, and then we'll go back to using it the same way that we've always done it. Whereas this is more like probably losing an arm, where you have to just learn how to do stuff we're using different methods and in a different way. And I think that's scary because, in a lot of ways, a lot of teachers, this isn't what they signed up for when they wanted to become teachers. They wanted that personal connection, in-person connection with their students, and almost creating it more like a physical family in like environment rather than what's happening right now.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really important point. I think that concern right now over, like I was saying earlier, am I trained for this at all? Before we, I do want to hear what Kelsey and Brian both think is the biggest obstacle. But before we move on to that point, real quick, pretty much the big question for me is right now, what kind of new training are teachers going to need? Because some teachers, like you, Adam, have spent years making YouTube videos and learning to talk to a camera and how to engage and keep people's attention. And it's it's non-trivial. I mean, this is a tremendous skill that is a completely different skill than what you went to school for, to learn how to be a teacher, right? So what do you think, Adam, or anybody? What do you think we're going to need to do? What's the logistics of training teachers to make the best use of this medium? And maybe what's the first quickest thing they could do to get good at doing this, right? Is there like one little trick you have or one little tip, maybe Kelsey, from video work that would get them a huge amount of improvement very, very quickly? Oh, did I stump the room?
Did you want to throw that out to Kelsey first, or did you want me to jump in with
Go ahead, jump in if you got something.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I think, okay, and I'm just going to tease out the language behind a case. I'll call it a K-6 world, and we'll talk 7, 12 in a different format, and higher ed altogether different. I think the one thing that our K-6 colleagues are really strong at is being able to curate curriculum and resources, put that into play, and we have an innate ability to be able to coach in the moment. And I said this earlier. I said some of your best instruction actually occurs in a place like the art room or in the gymnasium, and there's a reason for it. Is the teachers are able to interact with kids of various abilities. So they're able to differentiate, to use a term in education, their instruction to meet the needs of the individuals in the room while they're doing the activity. Now, what's lost here is I can't technically pin down the way that you're interacting with the content that I'm putting out. Okay. So that seems to be the biggest challenge. We're really good at curating things. We're excellent at pushing them out, and we're even better at coaching them. Okay. When I can't see your eyes when you're tracking print and you're a first grader, it's very challenging for me to know exactly what to say as a lean prompt to get you to do and see more. And so I think the biggest challenge is not so much the curating or creating curriculum to push out. And I think there are a lot of ways that can grow forward too. But I think ultimately it comes down to, we can't interact one-on-one, and our best in-time teaching, which is basically one-on-one conferring or in small groups, we can't technically have that thing at our fingertips unless we're doing some sort of synchronous teaching. When we're working asynchronistically, like most schools have to do right now, I think those are some challenges. So I think it's going to take a lot to kind of get on the same page. But ultimately, we need to be able to see kids and what they're doing and interacting with in order to kind of, dip in there and give them our best in-time teaching.
So do you think then that the future, if we really are going to be in this for a long time, once people get on, let's say you found out today that through the end of 2021, right, for the next entire, maybe, or just the next entire school year, like, September through June or whatever, if you found out that was going to be virtual, period, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, do you think we would immediately abandon the asynchronous thing that we're doing right now and start to pursue what Adam was talking about earlier, which is, his niece was sitting there in a real time on a video conference and every student was learning how to unmute themselves? And is that where we need to go if we're not just recovering for the quick end of the school year like we're doing right now, but actually planning this for the future?
I'm just going to quickly jump in on that. I think you're absolutely correct on that. I think that is going to take its turn. And I think most teachers are actually jumping in to do that work now. Many of my colleagues, Adam included, who are jumping in now, but they're doing it under circumstances where they're trying to engage and not lose the connection and the relationships, right? So they're doing it under low threat kind of ways. It's not always necessarily direct teaching that needs to be done, but it's under these sort of like, let's build community and really sustain our relationships during that time, which is fine. I think that's the starting point.
Yeah, I got something to add to that too. Me and Brian Sepe were talking earlier. I think it kind of connects with this because immediately, I think one thing that was encouraged is for all teachers to kind of teach using the digital tools that they're familiar with. However, I think if this becomes more long-term, and if it was ever to become a full school year, we'd definitely, at least at the district level, would probably have to be using similar platforms so that they integrate together better. And right now, I don't think there's a perfect one. Like, I think Google Classroom is good, but that was designed to be used with a physical classroom as well. I almost feel like there needs to be something almost like an educational Facebook platform where kids have their own profile, and they kind of have a profile in the Google Classrooms. But the problem with the Google Classrooms is like the work doesn't follow them year to year. It kind of stays within that classroom. And then the next year, a new teacher makes a new classroom. And sure, they can download all that content and put it in a drive somewhere. But I think it needs, like, if there was a timeline, like a Facebook timeline of their entire educational journey, you know, not, I mean, there's so many different reasons why I think that would have a lot of value, but I think it would also be the easiest for digital instruction at the bare minimum level of their next teacher being able to see exactly what they've done and what they know and how they've facilitated their education.
Go ahead, Kelsey.
Oh, I was just going to say, you should pitch that to Google. That's Google School. Get Google Classroom, and you got Google School, like the whole school. Like, I don't know, that sounds so exciting. I even just like the idea of being able to reflect upon what you've done. Like, I kind of wish I had stuff from my elementary years. I don't have any of that because my mom was like, I just throw it all away. But if you had it all online, like, it's not cluttering anything, you know, but that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But I like that idea.
I want to hop into that for 1 second. Specifically as an art teacher, I've been searching for that answer because what I wanted is my kindergarten students to have a digital art education portfolio that they can grow through until they're in seniors in high school. And I tried doing it with Google Classroom, but then I'd have to save the same problems that I was just mentioning was the problems I had with that. And again, I don't think there was a need for it for the traditional classroom education, but I think if it's going to be a virtual lessons, I think that need is going to be there.
But Adam, I think, you know, part of the answer is in exactly what you're describing. Okay. What you're saying is, I'm looking for the tool to have them curate their own creations. And I think the question we need to actually start to ask now that we are going to be remote in some ways is really, how do we get kids curating their own creations? And it doesn't matter what tool comes at me. If you want to curate using pictures on Instagram and you have an Instagram account, is that acceptable? I mean, you're virtually doing the same thing.
And I agree with you, but I think the only difference is in a world where the entire education is virtual, I think it does need to be something that can be cohesive and facilitated by the district, so it's all kind of in one place. I think they can and should still do that on other platforms, the way that that all of us do. But I think there's something to be said for it being part of their educational journey in the in the district.
So this is interesting because one of the questions I wanted to get to a little bit later, but I'm going to skip to right now because it's so relevant, is the question of, is virtual education increasing or decreasing inequity, right? Because I feel like it easily could go either way. On one hand, technology's become so affordable, and I totally recognize that affordable is a very relative term, but on the whole of human history, the technology you actually need to do virtual education right now, like the government could foot the bill for every kid in America very quickly. They paid out way more than that already to keep giant businesses afloat who didn't need the money, right? So that could be done. And to that point, it could be done at a national level. And you guys keep talking, this is interesting, I keep hearing that language of districts as if that matters anymore. And for me, on the outside, I hear educators say we're districts without even realizing how embedded that is in the old world system. But in the virtual world, why can't we actually have a national standard for how education is done and no longer have a poor school and a wealthy school have completely different access to education if it's all accessible on the internet? What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think the matter of equality when it comes to education, I think there are definitely different tiers of things that we're talking about here, different layers of them. And I'll just say from a standpoint of technology, yes, I do think the more accessible we can make that, the easier it will become to overhaul what we're doing remotely. I think there are some districts now who, and again, I just use that term, some schools and campuses that are using, they're still sending home packets of work materials in addition to the best that they could possibly put out when it comes to virtual teaching. So I do think it, and we haven't even mentioned perhaps the inequity when it comes to sort of rural parts of states. And I do think getting the bandwidth right, I think matters. We're a home now that it was this morning, 10 o'clock, 4 people are on 4 different devices and on 4 different calls with different communities. And I think that's a real challenge for people to navigate. And I jokingly said, when it comes to equality, as far as my kids are attending right now, they're attending afternoon and evening classes. They're not attending morning classes whatsoever right now. Now, that may be suitable for their lifestyle, but it's not suitable when we end our day at 3 or 4, and then now we're starting their day with work. So I think those are, we talk about family dynamics and equality there too. I just think there are a lot of conversations that have to happen with all of our stakeholders in order to kind of soothe some of those inequities.
I'll throw in
Yeah,
a
go
little
for
stuff.
it, Kelsey.
So I'm working with their district still, a district with a rural district, and then one that's urban but very low income. So I have like 2 dichotomies there I'm working with here. I'm in Iowa, so that's pretty much all we have. And in the rural areas, there's places like where I'm from, you don't even get cell phone reception most places. So you cannot even access the internet from your phone. Now here in the city, even kids with nothing, they still have phones and they have cell phones reception. So they have no problem getting access. So I know I'm kind of going a different direction with this, but it's interesting to me that it's almost like making it's more inequitable for people with more money that just don't have internet access than it is for people without money. And that's really flipped my brain. I never thought, I was like, oh, you guys can't act like, oh, we can't watch this YouTube video, our internet won't load. Where these kids with nothing, they're learning all this stuff on YouTube. So anyway, I find that very interesting that YouTube is kind of sort of crossing that line, but then also some people can't stream still, which it seems weird to me, but.
One thing that I've noticed too, because I've worked in a couple different districts in my career, and I've worked at some that are Title I less income family, and I found that a lot of those students actually had more access to that because they used things like YouTube as an entertainment source rather than because it's a free entertainment source rather than other things. But another thing I want to add to that too, I think there will be always some sort of element of districts because here's one thing I think that could happen in the future. I think there could be some sort of a national K-8 curriculum that's created that is for people who are going to essentially it's the new homeschool that's for everybody. That's what I think it's going to be. So that for a lot of people that are working from home, maybe they want their kids to have a permanent education from home as well. But the reason why I think the districts won't completely go away is because there's still always going to be families that need that kind of support, whether it's free and reduced lunches, as well as students with special needs and some with very severe special needs, as well as even like, again, certain jobs cannot go digital, and those essential workers or people who need to be in their physical environment need essentially educational childcare for their families as well.
I have a quick question here. What do you guys think about so we're talking about the educational system or learning. And to me, there's also a lot that students get from the educational system. Some of it's bad, but some of it is that community. Like how are we losing out on that community or with the virtual?
100%. That is, so the one thing that I cautioned colleagues about, or just to at least consider, myself included, was there are some kids that are going home to very difficult situations. So, there's a general rule that can happen sometimes in education. The week before a break, right? kids can show signs where they're acting out, perhaps. And it's not because they're acting out because they're choosing to behave in a certain way. They're acting out because the next week they're going to be home in a situation that doesn't have the same consistency and stability that my day-to-day schedule does at school. And I get welcomed by the teacher in the morning and I get that smile or whatever. That isn't necessarily guaranteed in everybody's home. And I think it's unfortunate, but it's reality. So I think a lot of kids, we can't guarantee that they're in situations right now where their schedules are intact or they have some semblance of a schedule, or even that they're in homes where perhaps somebody is ill or has fallen ill to what's happening now. And I just think that creates a different layer of inconsistency for wanting to be in that community, and that now they're distant from it and they're not sure how to interact when it comes because they haven't had enough reps at it yet. And I think that's why, and I give my colleagues a lot of credit because they're trying to engage and connect more frequently throughout the week through low threat activities in a way to say, there's some consistency here. I'm still here for you. I do see you.
What do you mean by low threat activities? Just like reaching out to them, saying how they're doing?
More like interactive games. I see a lot of colleagues who will jump on and they'll do like sort of an icebreaker activity where they're playing a rocks, paper, scissors tournament. Or, like Adam said, I need you guys to go up. We're going to do a scavenger hunt. Go find 3 things in your house that are blue. Now, the reality is you can't guarantee what kids are coming back with, but it's nonetheless, it's all engaging. And I think it's really about each kid seeing each other there. And I think that's important.
And I think another thing is to not think about what they're losing and try to think of it, what are the things that we are gaining as well? Because not to trivialize cyberbullying, but like any physical harm of something like that would be not a problem anymore. And I don't even really want to bring up, but tragedies that have happened in schools, like that's not going to be a problem anymore. So it's just like, I mean, with any decision you make in your life, there are pros and cons. It's a matter of how, and not to mention too, like I live in Buffalo. My whole family lives in California, and they moved there 7 years ago. And even though undoubtedly it's not the same as when they were here, we're still very connected, very social in ways that we couldn't have been in the past.
I love your thinking, Adam. And that's my question wasn't so much like, oh, what are we going to miss out, as much as like, I like thinking, okay, what's a problem we have? And then how can we turn it on its head? And we've seen, we can form communities and friendships online. Like I haven't met any of you in person, and I've known Brian online for like 1.5 years now. And I feel like we've built a strong connection and we've never met each other, but it's a new thing that people haven't necessarily done. So I think it's just good to be thinking about all the problems, and not in a way of like, oh no, but in a way of, okay, what can we do?
Yeah, and just one little thing to tack on there is getting kids comfortable with building those communities. Even if we get them back live, we still have to practice what does it mean to be a responsible digital sort of community member also, because I think you have the ability to do that and kind of embed that. My own 3rd grader can act a little distant. He's introverted. He acts a little distant when it comes to this sort of interaction because he's not sure where to put his eyes or his attention, right? And he wants to he's curious about things. So I feel like in some ways he just needs a little bit more of the reps to understand how this conversation goes, how he can jump in. And I think that takes some time.
One thing I want to tag onto that too is digitally. One thing that's interesting is that if there's 2 students in the physical classroom who are having a trouble, it can be a lot of work for a teacher all year to keep those kids, distant, and not in groups together. But, in a virtual world, like many of us have maybe blocked someone on Facebook or on Twitter, it's not a problem. Now, but then again, I think there can also be some negative to that too, because I think you learn a lot by dealing with those problems. And if it's blocked, then you don't have to deal with them. So again, like I said before, there kind of always is a trade-off, and you have to manage when's the right time to use that certain tool.
So this is all. So we're spending a lot of time right now actually talking around the fact that the technology itself changes the interaction, right? Like the observer influences the experiment kind of a thing. even just using this software versus using Zoom or some Google software, just whichever software you're in changes the experience for the user. Brian, like you were saying, with you got a third grader who doesn't know quite where to look and is kind of curious, and I wonder, is there going to, if we move virtual in the future, and I'm willing to claim this right now, that even if we don't go full virtual, somehow miraculously the world goes back to the way it was, I don't think we're going to lose the virtual aspect of education. I think it's going to become a bigger part of the conversation moving forward and over time, especially with AI and all just like the robotics revolution and everything else virtual. That's virtual reality and augmented reality and all this stuff. Having said all that, do we need now to start thinking, when kids are very, very young, when they're 1, 2, 3, do we need to be exposing them to more of this technology and not less, where parents have really had this pull, like, I don't want to have my kid have too much screen time when they're really, really little. It's bad for development. Well, not if when you're 5, 6 years old.
Did you guys lose Brian?
Yeah, and I think that the important thing with the exposure to more technology, right, in some ways, I think is going to cause. I think it's more. The question we might ask is, how do we balance the need for technology as it relates to our learning, and what are the outcomes we hope for these kids? Like, who are the children we are trying to shape? Like, for what? Like, what's the purpose? If the jobs, and Adam, you brought this up a couple of times, who knows what the jobs are of the future?
Yeah.
If we prepare at a younger age, I do think it's critical, but I do think it's important to say we also have to find ways to balance and know what it means to teach into that balance of being able to unplug, whether it's go take a walk or participate in extracurricular activities or sports or something like that. I think those sort of conversations have to balance a line of, like, what's the balance I need to teach into as well.
Yeah, I think this is such an important topic. It's something I thought about a lot, especially now that I have such a young daughter, thinking about how I'm going to manage it. Because I do think it's very important. It's such a huge part of my life, and I see all the value in it. But it is, again, I hear it all the time, like, oh, we only have 1 hour of screen time a day. But, like, you're right. Like, if this is how they're going to be, I mean, in a way, you're doing them a disservice. I remember seeing my youngest brother about 10 years ago, when he was just a baby, essentially, able to be a whiz at these computers, and it's helped him in a lot of ways now. But then again, it's interesting too, for as amazingly competent as he is at using it, he doesn't know how to create it as well. I think I don't know if he's as on point with being able to, like, fix a computer or something of that nature. But it's so interesting to think about these things, because you're absolutely right. Yeah, I don't know. Is it a disservice, or is it some sort of value? Considering what happened right now in the world, it's looking more and more like a disservice to me.
It's 100% a disservice.
Here's my question. When we say screen time, is that the problem too, that we say everything you do on a screen is equal? Like, playing a video game or watching like a stupid video is not the same as learning something or even watching something educational. And I think anytime we think everything is the same thing, we say I'm going to get an hour of it. Like, I don't want kids spending multiple hours playing video games that don't necessarily work.
I don't think when people do it to me, they're like, get off your phone. I'm like, I'm emailing my principal.
Yeah.
I'm not playing crazy.
That's such the weird part about technology is, like, I feel like in my mind, when I'm working on my phone in front of a client or something, like, well, they obviously know I'm working, but then to them that looks the same as if I'm scrolling on Facebook. And that's like a weird topic. But
go ahead, Brian. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, Kelsey, you're absolutely right. I mean, but I think it's, but you also know when it's time to unplug and grab that guitar behind you and do something with it, right? Like, I think that's the key. I think it's.
I agree.
I tell my guys all the time, like, of course you can have screen time. You can watch whatever you want, but you're also going to have time where you need to create something. I don't know what that creation is. For my oldest, it's creating YouTube videos with, and that's his thing. Is that skill going to serve him well in the future? Well, if I hold him back from it, pardon me?
is that still screen time too? Because there's editing involved with it, and like she was saying, like Kelsey was saying, is all screen time equal?
Yeah, right.
No,
Good
but you're right. But another thing I just think about too is like, I'm sure you've seen this as well, Brian Sepe. It's just like watching kids' presentations now has changed than it was even when I started teaching 8 years ago, because it's so funny how they really emulate that YouTube style, the way they introduce things and try to be engaging in a way. Like, I remember when I was young and doing videos, it was a nervous kid in front of a camera, and now they're kind of embodying their favorite YouTuber, whether it's Dude Perfect or that girl with the bow, JoJo Siwa, or whatever. So it's interesting because they are learning great presentational skills that are hard to learn in a regular classroom.
Yeah, so we're dancing around something that's really important here, which I'm not sure if any of us are really qualified to talk on. So I'll throw this out as an opinion, but like, so my wife is a therapist, right? And she's off somewhere else in the house right now doing telehealth, right? For kids, 5-6-year-olds that she's been doing for the last 2 months, something that was inconceivable 2 months ago, right? Doing therapy for young kids over the internet. Well, it's working. I mean, there's kinks they're working out, mostly the technology, to be honest. But the big question that's come up from psychologists in that field over the last 2 months is, isn't there a problem now, which is not just that, like Kelsey, you were saying everything is on the screen, like not all screen time is the same, but even further than that, which is, it used to be that when you went to school, your school in your head was a physical building that was a different place from where you had family time. That was a different physical place from when you visit your parents. It was a different place from when you were dating, maybe walking around a mall. Like, there's all these physical spaces we were able to separate the different relationships we have in the world. And now 100% of those relationships all exist on the exact same surface, right? And that we can't psychologically distinguish anymore between the different types of relationships we have. And I don't know if there was I was hoping a question would come out of that as I was rolling on it, but there didn't. I just wanted to bring up that point of, it's even worse than just the fact that not all screen time is the same. We're coming into the last 10 to 12 minutes here, and I want to bring up a few questions that were submitted kind of in advance of this today, and I have a feeling we're going to get a lot more folks on the replay than live. Everything in the world is live right now, and I feel like most folks are starting to watch this stuff on the replay, as Adam and I have both seen, and Kelsey as well. You've been doing lives, seeing 10 times, 20 times the views and engagement coming later. So let me get to some of the questions that actually came up. One of them we kind of danced around already, which was, how do we build classroom community? But here was the interesting kind of twist on this question, which was, how do we build a classroom community when students haven't signed up for the online course, but rather they've been forced into it? This is the big difference, right?
Ooh.
When you take an online course, like a kid takes or you do a master class, or you do whatever online, you've chosen to take that class. So you're going into it with the mindset of, I want to learn about this, I want to engage with this, I want to meet other people. But school is mandatory until a certain age, right? For a long time. How do we build community when they didn't sign up to be in this class? They just have to be. I'll hand that off to anybody.
They never signed up for it. You know how many kids would be? I bet you I wouldn't be surprised if a couple kids, and when this was first announced as a week or two off, they're like, "Whoa, no school for a week, yay!" You know. But again, at this point, I'm sure they're missing it.
But I think you're right. But I think two things. One, what you just said, they're already missing it, and you can feel that from kids. And Brian, you were talking about that earlier. There's a lot of kids that desperately want to go to school just to get out of the home environment. Even kids from good households. I mean, for me, like as a teenager, I came from a great household. I don't have any issues to complain about, right? But the only thing I couldn't wait to do was go to school, just because that's where all my friends were. That's where the stuff was that I enjoyed learning. Yeah, there's the stuff I didn't like learning too, but all the stuff I enjoyed was there. And so I think the question is, Adam, no, kids never signed up for school before, but once they were in the physical building for that amount of time, 5 days a week, they found something. Most kids find at some point something, some place to belong, right? Something to get on board with. And I wonder, is it going to be much harder to make those connections and build that community here.
So the question is, how do we get them to enroll, even though they didn't technically enroll? And,
Exactly.
and my thoughts are kind of really trying to bring their interest into what you're doing. Make them see like this can be about you. I don't know if that would help, but once you get them interested in something that they want to do and put the learning on them, I hope that would be one way to start making them excited about online learning.
Yeah.
Or like the fact you said, you don't have to be at school at 7 o'clock. Like I'm a morning person, but a lot of kids aren't. So like, I know like Brian said, Brian Sepe said there might be issues with families if you have weird schedules, but some people like to do something at 9 o'clock at night. And that does give you that option. So I don't know, like highlighting the positives of it might be.
And
And
the reality is a lot of these kids have been digitally learning longer than the teachers have. I can't tell you how many kids, they've been doing it already. So the onus is on us, I think, to make it engaging and something that they want to watch. Tons of kids I've had, I said, they show me something. I said, how did you learn that? Oh, I watched a tutorial online. They're willing to do it if it's something that's engaging and created and curated in a way that makes them want to do it.
Yeah, and I think building the community, and I'm so glad you brought up the word enrollment, Kelsey, because I think that's a critical piece. And I hadn't thought about it for this conversation, but I'm so glad it's illuminated here. Jim Knight, who is one of my coaching mentors and has written some of these books back here. So he talks about when I work with colleagues, it's not that like somebody's going to sign up and say, man, you know what? I need a coach today. That doesn't typically happen. What the coach's role is to get a colleague or a teacher to understand that by going down the inquiry or action research with your kids, your students, by going down that path, you will inherently develop new skills and you will inherently ask better questions and you will arrive at better conclusions as a result of this sort of professional development or this coaching experience. So it's up to the coach to establish, how do I enroll teachers and understanding that? And I think it's incumbent upon us as educators now to ask, how do we enroll? And Adam and I talk about this a lot when it comes to teaching this way, is like, how do I get children to want to subscribe to my work? Right? Like that's the question we need to ask. It's a really hard question. And I think there are ways to be engaging. I was telling Adam the other night, jokingly said that I tried my hand at magic, right? Like to engage kids, to kind of get them on board initially in the classroom, because I felt like it kept their engagement for a minute. And then I was able to kind of transition to other things. But I think that's the question we need to be asking, is how do we build that community, but how do we get them to want to sort of subscribe or come back to that community?
It reminds me, and Brian, we've talked about this before too, like the work of Dave Burgess, the Teach Like a Pirate thing. Yeah. I mean, that's what that model is now more important now than it ever has been. And it's kind of because we talked about writing a book on education before. This was before all this happened, about a year and a half ago. We decided we should write a book called Teach Like a YouTuber, because there's so much stuff about what YouTubers do to get the engagement in students. And that's what every teacher has always wanted. And those same principles, even if we do virtual teaching for the next 2 years, and then we go back to normal classes, those practices of being an engaging teacher can also translate perfectly to being in the physical classroom. So there's nothing to lose in doing this. It'll only add value to you as an educator.
That's such a good point and a good place to pivot on to kind of bringing this all in, which is I think a lot of people haven't taken YouTubers seriously for a long, long time. And obviously, you know, those of us who are in the YouTube world of creating stuff there realize, actually, I think most of the public realized when all the late night talk shows went to producing stuff from home, that actually YouTubers are better, right? And it's that, right? Not that people like Jimmy Fallon aren't wonderfully entertaining. He's very talented, but he's got a massive team that's required to put on that show. Meanwhile, there's all these just individuals on tiny budgets in their bedrooms that have audiences that are vastly bigger than any late night show host has ever had, and they do it on a daily basis, right? And so those principles, because nobody has to watch your YouTube videos, right? They choose to watch them. And what I was thinking, Brian Sepe, when you were, I don't know why I said your last name. I know who I'm talking about. When I was, we've been on here for a while. When you were just on that role there, I was thinking about the question I was going to ask you as a follow-up, which was how it's one thing to want to get students enrolled. Obviously, that's the goal, right, Kelsey? But the question is, how do you get them enrolled in the courses or the classes that like they just don't like? Because like students wouldn't enroll. Like for me, when I was in high school, I would never have enrolled in history class. I hated history, but one of my history classes in high school I took once introduced me to philosophy, and I ended up going down a rabbit hole because of a class I never would have chosen to take in, and ended up getting a degree in philosophy and starting and abandoning a PhD in philosophy and all these other things, right? Card tricks were more fun. But the point is getting that enrollment. I was going to ask you about that. And then I think Adam just nailed what would have been the answer to that, which is they have, like, the answer would be the students have to take all the classes, and it's the teacher's job right away on day one, and then every single day after that, to get and maintain a subscription to their class. It's a great way to think about it. Yeah. So I want to ask, I'm going to do a round robin for the last kind of question here. There were a lot of really interesting things that were submitted here. Some teachers I've talked to concerned that right now, decreased funding is actually what's happening at a national level, and that's going to lead to increased class sizes, which is the opposite of what's being recommended right now. I had a teacher write to me that said, that's just said this as a statement, I don't see how schools can operate safely in person until there's a widely available vaccine. That was just a statement. And this is a teacher who's concerned about their students and their kids. So let me go around and ask you this. Do you think schools will open in the fall? And if they can, do you think they should, or should we play with the virtual thing for a while? Adam, you wanna start us off there?
Yeah, I'll start us off. I think we will, but I think it'll be a very different model. And the reason why I think we will, because I don't think as educators and as districts and as an educational system, we've had enough time to develop a process that we're sure is going to have results. Because that's the most important thing, is make sure that we are teaching kids. What I think, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some sort of model where it's either on a week, off a week in person, and then a week of virtual classroom. And the classroom time is more used almost like a lab time, and to do those physical things. Because to be honest, even throughout the years, there's been a lot of things that are done in the classroom that easily could be virtual, even though it may be easier not to. But I think we're going to be seeing some sort of a model like that, if I just had to guess. But as we know, anything can happen.
Sure. So Adam, just to clarify, you do think we will go back to school by and large in the fall?
Yeah, in some form or another. I think we will.
Okay. Kelsey, I know this might be a little bit out of your element because you, like me, are not actually a teacher, but what do you see coming? Or maybe if you want to pivot this question for yourself, do you have a tip, a technology tip for teachers who, whether they have to do it full-time or only part-time virtual, that they can make the most of the virtual setting? Oh, hang on.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Yep.
Am I muted? Okay. My tip I'll give a video production tip because that's more my area expertise. If you decide that you do want to create videos, because you should anyway, so I'll just take a step back. No matter what happens this fall, you'd be foolish to not spend this summer creating some type of content you can use in the fall, no matter what. So if something happens where it is virtual, you're ready to go. And if it's not, well, it's great. You already have stuff you can use. And that's what I've been working with some teachers with, is creating that content to have a library built up. So you should be doing that. So my tip for that is also to do some basic research into how you can even use your phone to make yourself look and sound better. I know that you may not think it matters, but if you look and sound a little more professional, a little more like a YouTuber, I do think that will help your kids do better. And I'll do a shameless plug. I do have a YouTube channel that's helping people that are just starting out using their phones. So check it out, and I think you might get some good tips from there.
It's not a shame. It's not shameless. It's a great,
I just wanna help
great
people,
resource.
so.
No, it's a great resource. And Kelsey just kicked this, kind of kicked this YouTube channel into gear at the start of all this as a way to help teachers, educators, exactly kind of jumpstart and avoid the years of trial and error that people like me and Adam have gone through on our own. So that's great, Kelsey. What's the channel called?
It's just my name, Kelsey Hammer-Parks.
Kelsey
When I
Hammer
started
Parks.
Parks. Yep.
Great. We'll make sure that's somewhere below in the ether. Okay. And Brian, so maybe you want to take us in as a teacher. Do you think we're going to be back in school in the fall? And to what end do you think we're going to incorporate virtual? Oh, hang on.
Sorry.
There you go.
Yep. I think we'll be back in the fall. I think it is, as Adam pointed out, I think it's going to look a lot different. I think you're going to have some sort of flexed schedule or times. And I actually think that's going to, I think the unknowns of that are what's causing some of the fear. But I actually feel like that might incite a little bit more unrest with this whole platform. So I think Kelsey's point about banking and curating things now is probably the most critical element of this entire conversation. Because if you don't prepare now, you don't use this time wisely, as Kelsey pointed out, I do think if given the same circumstances in October or November, it's going to be really hard to recoup skills at that point. So getting comfortable being on camera, or even as Kelsey pointed out, I went out and purchased this headset here, which was a drop on the bucket for $29, but it improved my audio. Right. And I think just those minor upgrades make a big difference. And the power is here. Right. Like I too have a YouTube channel. A very close friend in the lower right-hand corner here has encouraged me to do that. Thanks, Adam. Where I document sort of my professional growth and my learning. And the reason why I would subscribe to any of that, Brian's channel, Kelsey's channel, Adam's channel, is because these are things that maybe I subscribe to because they fit the virtues that I live with. And I so kind of onto the tangent of, I do think we'll be back. I think it's incumbent upon us to kind of make sure that we're ready for that, banking those resources as we go forward. And I think somebody brought up in the chat here, Lori, she mentions just kind of redefining your why. And I think that is a critical point. If you haven't already done that and you haven't actually put pen to paper and sat down and really ironed out your why, like why are you even in front of kids to begin with? I think now's the time to get those things done and going for sure.
I think that is a great place to end. Thank you all for being here. I think we had a great discussion. I'm not sure we solved anything, but I don't know if there is any way to solve anything right now. I think more than anything right now, what teachers, parents, students all need to be asking themselves is the big question, which is, what is school for? This is a question that many of us have heard before, coming right out of the mouth of Seth Godin, somebody I look up to very much. And this big question, what is school for? If we can all start to answer that for ourselves and for the system at a large, I think we're going to get closer to the right answers. So Kelsey, Brian, Adam, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate your time. This was great.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
All right. Well, I'm just going to close this out. Thank you, everybody who was who was able to join us live. Thank you, everybody who's watching on the replay. Let us know in the chat or in the comments any questions you have. I'd love to do more of these and invite some fantastic panelists, some new folks, some folks you just saw here today in the future to continue this conversation, because I think this is just the start of a national conversation that's going to go on for a long time. So having said that, my name is Brian Miller. Thanks so much for sticking with me. And always remember, our world is a shared experience. Every interaction is meaningful, and every person you meet, even virtually, is important. We'll see you soon.